The Cleveland Guardians are known for their pitching innovation. One thing they're not known for, catcher offense. But there's a pitching innovation that could sweep the league that the Guardians could take advantage of and turn their catcher offense around. Let's talk about it on today's Locked On Guardians.
Tanner Bagger of the Guardians, and you're listening to Locked On Guardians.
You are Locked On Guardians, your daily podcast on the Cleveland Guardians. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's up, Guardians fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Guardians. If it's your first time here, thanks for being here. We are the Locked On Guardians podcast and the Locked On Podcast Network, your team, your Cleveland Guardians every day. And we cover the Cleveland Guardians from the majors, the minors, the draft on our podcast. It's our favorite 30 minutes of the day. We hope it's your favorite 30 minutes of the day as well, because we infuse a little bit of baseball talk every day into your schedule about the Cleveland Guardians. If you are new here, my name's Justin Lada. I have been one of the two co-hosts of this podcast for the last 3 seasons, 3 years, and I've also spent 18 years covering the Guardians minor league system. I've seen prospects all the way from Arizona to Lake County up to Columbus and making their graduation at the major league level. Thank you to all of our everydayers who are here, of course, and making us your first listen tonight every day wherever you get podcasts. Shout out to the insiders as well. We are free everywhere, including YouTube and anywhere you get audio podcasts as well. And on today's show, we're going to touch on some of the trades that are going to keep you up at night. It is Halloween, so we'll talk about some of the worst trades in Guardians history. We'll catch up on some AFL and Winter League updates. I got 3 players we'll talk about that will be of note that you'll want to hear about what they're doing over the offseason. Actually 4. But we're going to talk about game calling and the innovation that could change catcher hitting for the Guardians if they adopt it. There are some drawbacks to it, though, so we'll get into that. Before we jump into all of it today, this episode of Locked On Guardians brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5. And if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to win or use across the app. Hopefully you win. Download the FanDuel app today. All right, let's get right into it. So the Miami Marlins last year did something interesting that is done in other parts of baseball, but has not historically been done at the major league level. And that is call games from the dugout. Now, this obviously happens at the little leagues. I believe there's some high schools that do it. The college game certainly does it. The Marlins did it last year in the minor leagues. That was a big story for the Marlins to do it at the major leagues. And it first really got attention at the major league level late in September. So there's not a ton of data on this, but it's something they developed. And again, something they did in the minor leagues. And Lance Bredzowski, who does Lance's pitcher's notes, is on WC Family Network. Jeff and I talk about him all the time. He is like the godfather of pitching data, or at least in terms of breaking down mechanics, data usage, and some scouting reports. I really love his work. Would really recommend his Substack called Lance's Pitcher Notes. But he called it out, and he says this is the future wave of the league. He says that more teams are going to adopt this going forward. And we're going to talk about the upsides and the drawbacks to this. Now, obviously, the Guardians' catching situation in terms of offense is pretty bad. I mean, they finished 25th in baseball in WRC plus for catching offense, and that was 72 WRC plus. So 28 points or percentage points below league average. Only the Pirates, the Giants, the Rays, the Nationals, and the Angels were worse than them when it came to catcher offense last year. Now, of course, Cleveland Guardians catching defense and then defensive positional adjustments, they were 3rd in baseball at 25.1. This is according to Fangraphs, by the way. I know there was a comment yesterday about Jaron Duran's WAR and saying it was a different WAR. We were using Fangraphs. I tend to use Fangraphs WAR more during a player's career, and then I use Baseball Reference after their playing career because they kind of they have the jaws wrapped in for the Hall of Fame stuff, but story for another day. The point is this a way for the Guardians to improve offense for catchers, because they desperately need that, by taking some of the burden off of their catchers from game calling? And really, it's not even taking the burden off. Is there a way this also improves as well? Is this something they could do to improve their pitching? Now, I will say this. One of the things I heard last year about the Guardians pitching staff is that game calling could have been a little bit better. It could have been a little bit better. There was a lot of talk about how early in the game you might have had guys like Bo Naylor have a good, solid game plan, and they were good at calling it early, but they wouldn't adjust late. Whereas other guys might not be as good early on with the game plan, but they're quick to adjust, like Austin Hedges. I know there was some talk about that last year. And you might remember early in the year, there was a string where Tanner Bybee and Luis Ortiz and Gavin Williams were giving up first batter, first pitch home runs because they were maddeningly just throwing first pitch fastballs every game, and they were getting ambushed. I didn't look at the numbers on this for this because I was digging into some other stuff. But I know for sure all of them combined for at least 5 or 6. That's 3 pitchers combining for 5 or 6 first batter, first pitch homers. That's pretty bad. You don't want that. That's pretty bad. So the reason the Marlins started doing this are a lot of different things, right? They had a very young team. They had young catchers. Their primary catcher at that point in the season they started doing this was Augustin. I can't remember Augustin's Ramirez, the guy they got from the Yankees from the Jazz Chisholm trade the year before. And really what the benefit of calling the game from the dugout is you're optimizing sequencing and you're taking some of that burden off of the catcher in theory. But some of that has to do maybe more with bringing along young catchers. But the idea is more about optimizing game flow. You will be able to call pitches from the dugout with models by saying, okay, if you throw a 4-seam fastball up in the zone and he swings and misses through it, your model is going to say, well, this is the next pitch you should throw. It should be a curveball low and away or whatever. It's going to do it based on the pitcher's best pitches. It's going to do it based on the batter input of what happened the last pitch. And it's going to, reset and tell you what the next move is. So if you're 3-0, it might tell you a fastball, get me over. But, if the guy lays off a slider outside, it might tell you to go back upstairs with a fastball. Like, it's going to tell you what pitch to rely on next based on the pitcher's strength and what the hitter's last outcome was. So there's this thing that catchers do and pitchers do. It's called reading swings. And that's more of a natural thing. You're reading the swing. You're reading what the hitter is doing during the at-bat. And you're kind of using that along with the predetermined game plan and scouting reports, like studying for a test. And you're using your instincts throughout the game and what the pitcher's doing, what the hitter's doing to inform your next decision. This is really just taking it and putting it into model form and trying to do it in a more scientific way versus, I know a lot of people who are listening to this are going to say, no more analytics. I'll talk more about the drawbacks of this, but I'll talk about why it's useful as well. But it is optimizing a pitcher's repertoire and trying to sequence the hitter better. And I think sequencing was a big problem for the Guardians last year. And it doesn't have to be a cheat sheet or a way to influence more analytics into the game. It really has it could be used as a training tool, honestly. You don't have to use it all the time. Pitchers can shake it off. The Marlins said that their pitchers could shake it off. There is some issues that comes into play with that. I will say, the story that I first saw in this came from the Marlins on September 19th, where Jansen Junk, I think, threw the best game of his season last year. It was, I believe, 7 innings. Let me double check my numbers here. But it was one of the best games he's pitched all year. It was 7 innings, 5 strikeouts, no walks, 3 hits, 1 run. Now, he did face the Rangers, who had a very putrid offense last year, so take that with a grain of salt. His next outing against the Phillies on the road, he only allowed 1 run and 5 hits, but he threw 61 pitches in 4 2/3, struck out 4, but no walks. There's more data that you have to check on that, right? Hard hit rate, outcomes, things like that. But the best outing of his season, came with the calling from the dugout. Is that that's not necessarily enough evidence to say it's a correlation more than a causation because it's 1 game sample. But I thought it was interesting. And Lance Brzezinski, who I think is one of the most intelligent analysts out there and knows pitching and data and the teams better than anybody, says this is going to be a league-wide trend that catches on in the future. So I'll talk about how the Guardians could improve on this We'll talk more about the drawbacks. We'll also talk about some winter AFL League updates you're going to want to hear about on the rest of today's Locked On Guardians. Today's episode of Locked On Guardians brought to you by our friends over at Prize Picks. We all have to make decisions every single day. But what if you could get paid for making the right decisions? That's what Prize Picks is for. You don't have to miss out on the excitement of the NBA or the NFL seasons. And I've said before, it's really easy on Prize Picks because all you're doing is picking more or less on 2-player stat projections or more. If you get those right, you're going to win. It only takes you a minute to set your lineup. You have Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes this weekend, so you could go more or less on their passing touchdowns, their rushing yards, all their stuff this weekend. You can put those together in the same lineup. And maybe you're thinking about the Cavs. Jared Allen and Sam Merrill may not play this weekend for the Cavs over 2 games. They have the injury reboots. If one of your players leaves the game early with an injury, it's going to save your lineup from a loss. How fun is that? Download the Prize Picks app today, and you're going to use code LOCKEDONMLB. That's going to get you $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONMLB for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Guardians your first listen today, every day, wherever it is that you get podcasts. We really do appreciate you being part of our community and being part of your daily routine. We love talking baseball with you. This is always fun, even if it's the off season and there's not a lot going on yet. We still find things to talk about. We hope you find interesting. Suggestions for the show are always welcome. If there's topics you want to hear us go a little bit deeper on, while there isn't much in the news to get into, but whatever, make sure you are supporting the show if you like it by hitting the bell on YouTube so you get notified of when episodes are posted. Whenever we're going to go live, reaction videos to news in the off season, we'll do those. You can auto download on all of your audio platforms so it stays in your feed for your next podcast up. So when you're ready to go to the gym in the morning run or walk your dog, you can turn on the podcast or even catch up if you're behind on a couple episodes because it's the off season. All right, let's get back into what we were talking about with the Guardians and the Marlins, who are, were calling games from the dugout late last season. Now, let's be fair and say that the Marlins are not exactly the most successful example of pitching or development in general because, they had a decent season a couple years ago where they made the playoffs with Kim Ng as their GM, and they let it go, or they were going to essentially demote her, and they brought in Peter Bendix, who was with the Rays. So it doesn't shock me that the Rays GM is maybe kind of at the forefront of this. Lance Brzezowski was talking about how the pitch calling model they're using, they think it'll make them 10% better in terms of efficiency. And that's better, again, that's better sequencing, better game calling. You're making sure that usage rates don't get out of control, so there's not too many fastballs. All that stuff has to be adjusted. And this is the same thing. I know people are going to say, oh, this is just more analytics. It's more analytics. You need to be more feel. It's still a guide, right? It's still a guide. You can sit there and say, this is the next best pitch. It's just data you're putting in front of you. Nobody is saying you have to use that next pitch. Now, you're going to want to test it so the model can adjust and you can put inputs in and results and adjust things based on that. So you're going to want to use it to test it out. And the Marlins could do this because they were out of the race. It was September, whereas the Guardians may be in a different situation. There's going to be different ways to go about this if it does catch on. But you don't have to sit there and say, like, okay, we have to go with this because that's what the computer says. No, this is another piece of information you could say, okay, this is what it's suggesting. Why not do we think this is the best course of action for the next pitch? And you're saying, well, I don't want to introduce more automation and more analytics into baseball. This is no different than the NFL where offensive coordinators and head coaches or college football, they call plays, right? The quarterback can audible on the field, right? But the play calls are mostly pretty much coming from the headsets. The NBA, it's the same thing. They're calling in plays from the sideline. This is no different. Even on defense, the defensive coordinator is calling out coverages. So the players on the field are reacting. They're not calling plays. You can still call a pitch and shake it off. Now, the issue with this is the pitch clock has made it harder for pitchers to shake off catchers. And that could impact, I think it has impacted, honestly, how hitters are reading pitchers and going at bat to bat and sequencing. Because without the time to shake a hitter off or shake a catcher off, I think the hitter can think along with you more casual or more closely. Whereas if you're able to shake them off, maybe you give the hitter something else to think about. So the pitch clock comes into play with this, and I think calling the game from the dugout makes it a little bit harder, because what was going on in Miami is they were calling in off of like cards, almost like, you see those cards that teams hold up in college football. I've seen in high school football with like different numbers and symbols and icons on them to call a play. So, that could be an issue to the pitch clock. But you don't have to shake a catcher off, because hopefully you're getting the most optimized pitch calling. And the pitcher still got to execute. He's still got to execute his pitch whenever it's called. And again, I don't want to go into major sample sizes here, but I will just kind of point out, like, how did this go for the Marlins? Well, this lasted for them over, I got 9 games from the date I saw the article on September 19th to the end of the season. They had a 3.11 ERA with a 4.56 FIP over that stretch of September 19th to the end of the season. And that put them, I believe, at 10th in baseball, which behind the Guardians. If you want to go back the previous 9 games before that for the Marlins, they were also 9th with a, they were 9th in baseball. Their ERA was very similar. It was actually higher than the previous 9 games. So you're not really getting, that much out of it, I suppose, at least in that short sample. It was a 3.04 ERA and a 3.74 FIP. So actually they were better without the pitch calling from the dugout. But again, it's a small sample size. We're not going to read into that too much. But I think there are some ways Cleveland could use this to their advantage if they do it. Now, obviously, Cleveland has been very good at pitching development, and they have some really bright minds in their dugout. They don't want to lose. So you could have guys like a Brad Goldberg or Joe Torres calling the game from the dugout, or you can add a pitching coordinator to the dugout, just like you have an offensive coordinator. So it could be a way to promote some coaches to the major league staff that you don't want to lose, but you don't have a role for them. You make them the pitching game coordinator or something, or it's Goldberg or Torres, and they're calling the pitches from the dugout. The other way is this. So the Marlins model is not factoring in hitter tendency. So it's not factoring in like heat maps where the hitter is best at, what pitches he's better and worst at. It's more based off of what the pitcher does well, which is good. I think you want to focus a lot on what the pitcher does well versus what the hitter is good at. But if you want to optimize it and have both inputs to get the right output, so that if they're using a pitch model to tell you what to call, you need to have both data sets of information. The Guardians could do that. I think that's interesting. And, is it going to help them with catcher offense? I think that's the main point here. Is it going to help them with catcher offense? You take away the burden of game calling from them, or you try to. Does it help Bo Naylor hitting a little more? Maybe. You can focus more on things like blocking, and you still have to frame. Even though we have the ABS challenge system coming next year, you still have to frame. You're only going to get 2 challenges a game. Now if you're right, but you only get 2 challenges. And that's going to be another area where the catchers have to think about things. The only people that can challenge a pitch are the pitcher, the hitter, and the catcher. So you got to be careful when you use them. What's the best time to use them? You're thinking about leverage. You're thinking about situation. You're thinking about the best chances where it is. That's something they're going to have to figure out. And I know Austin Hedges talked about it in his press conference over Zoom when he was re-signed again for the season. He talked about how a lot of this offseason is going to be spent on learning the ins and outs of the ABS challenge system so they can make that work to their advantage, because the Guardians need to win on the margins. They need those little victories that can add up. But I do wonder if you do take game calling away from the catchers, can they focus more on hitting? Now, I know some people will say, well, that's boring. You're trying to automate the game a little bit more, and will the pitchers and catchers, how will they feel? And again, I think it's more about testing and teaching. I think if you do this enough, the catchers could implement it themselves instead of being micromanagers. Or you could do it with the younger catcher. You could do it with a certain pitcher who's maybe new. There's a lot of different ways you can implement. I think it's interesting. Let me know your thoughts on it, because I know it's a very new school versus old school kind of argument. Once again, I've tried to lay out the pieces of it. I love the chess match of baseball. I think the pitcher hitter cat and mouse game is the most fun thing in sports. It's the most fun thing in baseball to me. But I don't think it takes away from you. You still have to execute. And again, pitchers can shake off those kind of things. You could still kind of optimize things and tweak things here and there. I'm interested to see where this goes, and if Lance thinks it's going to catch on. I'm interested to see if it gets used, and I think the Guardians are the kind of organization that could benefit from this and be one of the leaders in it. Because I'm sure the Marlins haven't optimized it yet, but we'll see if this catches on. Let me know your thoughts in the comments on what this could be, and if you think it could help the catching and the hitters, because they really need that. All right, coming up next, we'll talk Winter League updates, Arizona Fall League updates you're not going to want to miss. I got 4 players. We can go over some good news on them, and I'll give you the most shocking, horrifying trades in Guardians history on Halloween on the rest of today's Locked On Guardians. The NBA is back in action, and there's no better time to get in on the action, no better place than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So if you missed the first start of the game for any NBA games, maybe you want to ride the hot hand at the end of the game too. You want to see what's going to happen later in the game. FanDuel's got live bets. Everything who's going to score next. You can bet on that big 3-pointer or a fourth quarter comeback, and you can combine all those live bets into a same game parlay for a bigger shot at a payout. I like the big payouts. I'm responsible, but I like the big payouts at the end. And it keeps games exciting, especially when your team's making a late push in the fourth quarter. Cavs are 7.5-point dogs at home, or I should say favorites at home. They're giving 7.5 points to the Raptors on Friday, got the Hawks on Sunday. So that's on tap for you while the Browns are on a bye week. So right now, FanDuel is actually giving Locked On Guardians and Locked On MLB customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com, sign up, play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks for tuning in to this Friday Halloween edition of Locked On Guardians. Again, free and available wherever you get podcasts. Make sure you come back and catch all the episodes over the offseason. We're still 5 days a week now until about Christmas. After the winter meetings, we'll drop it 3 days a week. So we're still here 5 days a week talking Guardians baseball with you. And after you're done watching us or listening to us, head on over to Locked On MLB to catch up and wrap up the World Series coverage with our MLB game night and Locked On MLB with Sully covering all angles of the World Series. And then, of course, there'll be off-season episodes as well that Sully does a great job on. All right, so we talked about the pitch calling from the dugout. Let's talk AFL and Winter League updates. So let's start with this. Daniel Espino obviously is the guy everyone's paying attention to in the Arizona Fall League. Things are going really well for Daniel Espino. He had another outing, the first time he's pitched more than an inning in a game on October 29th. He threw an inning and 2/3, got up to almost 40 pitches. So that was nice to see. He's still kind of on a week-to-week rotation. So he's got a starter's schedule, but he's still not throwing a starter's workload. 4 2/3 innings this fall in his return. 7 strikeouts, 3 walks, 4 hits. And again, he's topped out at 102. And the stuff looks really good. I mean, he is up there in whiff rate, 45% whiff rate out in the AFL. That has him in the top 10 in whiff rate. Strikeout to walk ratio is up there as well. He is one of the best in the league out there at that. He is getting, again, the velo is way up there. Still a very fastball heavy approach. Strikeout rate overall, I mean, he's up there. He's, I believe, also in the top 10 in strikeout rate. I could be wrong on that. Just going to take a look at the data while we kind of talk more about this. But yeah, it's more like top 20. So he's not quite up there in terms of strikeout rate, but things are going really well for him. And he seems happy. I've seen a couple of interviews with him. He seems happy to be back, obviously grateful and in good spirits. That means he's healthy, and that's what's really going good there. Let's talk about some other guys out there too. So let's talk about Trenton Denholm, who is developing a knuckleball. He's been working with Tom Candiotti a little bit. Going a lot of longtime Cleveland baseball fans will remember as the last knuckleballer Cleveland had to help him out. And I think the numbers are going pretty well for Trenton Denholm out there. He's got 6 strikeouts and 4 walks in 5 2/3 innings. He has allowed 3 earned runs so far in those innings, but he had an outing on October 30th that went really well. He threw 3 shutout innings, 4 strikeouts, 5 hits allowed in that game. And the greatest thing about that was the knuckleball. He threw 5 knuckleballs in that game. That's the most he's thrown in a game so far. He hasn't got any whiffs on it yet, but he's killing spin. I mean, the average spin rate on that knuckleball was 292. The lower the better if you're not familiar with that. But, he's pairing it with a fastball that's still 91, 92. I'll be curious to see how this works out for him and if he brings it into spring training next year with the Guardians. Or he won't even make it there, because if you were an everydayer, you remember on one of my past episodes, I said, well, this means he's going to get traded because the last 2 knuckleballers the Guardians had, they traded away. It was Stephen Wright before that, and then they also had Matt Waldron, who ended up with the Padres. Both those guys were solid for a little bit. Waldron's still hanging around, but they haven't found extended success yet. But the last time they've had knuckleballers, they've traded them. So this means they're just going to trade them because they don't trust their catchers to catch them. I don't know. Very weird. And then I heard on a podcast recently from the Arizona Fall League that I think it was the Baseball America podcast, that Alfonsin Rosario has the hardest thrown ball of an outfielder in the AFL at 97 miles an hour. So big arm by Alfonsin Rosario. Defense is good. We like that. At least the arm, the range isn't good. But we know that also fits into the Guardians. They don't care about range. They want you to just throw the heck out of the ball, and he can do that. So that's fun. The last player we'll talk about, and this is not an AFL player, this is a Dominican Winter League player. Then it's our old buddy, Big Christmas, Jhonkensy Noel. I don't have any data in front of me, and honestly, the data doesn't matter. What is going on for him in the Winter League is this. If you're watching on YouTube, you see Noel's stance on YouTube, and he's got his hands way back by his back hip. His front foot is way out in front of the batter's box, and he's on his tippy toes, and he's flexing his glutes pretty hard there. Big man, scary man, but he's a giant teddy bear. Look at the other screenshot in the Dominican Winter League. His hands now are up by his chin, up by his ear, I should say, but chin level. That front foot is still pretty protruded, but he's raised his hands. That's something the Guardians have been trying to do with Noel for a while now, is get him to raise his hands. And I don't know if that's going to help him make more contact. Really, we've talked about this before. The issue with Noel is this. It's pitch selection. He is terrible at pitch selection. He's not a patient hitter. He's got to be able to lay off breaking stuff. He's got to be able to lay off junk. I don't know that a stance can do that. Maybe it can help him check his swing better. Maybe he'll get more contact on certain pitches. Maybe it'll eliminate some holes in the zone. But the chase rate is the big problem for Noel. I don't think that fixes this, but I am willing to see these changes in action. I am willing to see one more chance with him with these changes, if he's willing to make the change, because the Guardians have been trying for a while with him, and it hasn't stuck yet. All right, let's move on to a little Halloween segment as we get out of here on this episode of Lockdown Guardians. We're going to talk about the trades that are keeping Chris Antonetti up at night, or any ex-Cleveland GM, because there's other ones too. Frank Trader Lane comes to mind. These are the spookiest, the scariest, the horrible trades in Cleveland Guardians history. We're going to start with number 10, Graveyard in Center Field. I've named all these after what sound like Halloween Tales or Halloween type movies. So Graveyard in Center Field. That, of course, is the trade that ended up with Yainer Diaz to Myles Straw in Cleveland. Now, Straw was obviously good for a little bit. The Guardians actually did net a positive win in Baseball Reference. One win over Yainer Diaz going to Houston. Doesn't really factor in Phil Maton, but that's one of those trades you regret. I'm not regretting it too hard because, I know Yainer Diaz had a good year once. He was down this year, but I've never been a big believer in Yainer Diaz. But Graveyard in Center Field, because the Guardians brought another center fielder. I thought that was going to be the answer. Turns out he wasn't. So it remains a Graveyard. Scary trade. All right, number 9, Silence of the Aces. I have number 9 as the Cliff Lee deal. The Cliff Lee deal was okay. I mean, I'm not ranking this too low because you did get Carlos Carrasco back in that deal, but Jason Knapp didn't work out. Jason Donald and Lou Marson didn't do much for you either. So that was a funky one, and you traded a Cy Young winner. So that really stinks, and will keep you up at night. Number 8, this one maybe should be ranked a little bit higher. Let me know how you feel about it. I have the Dynasty killers. This one is the CC Sabathia trade to the Brewers. Went on to have about 15 Baseball Reference wins above replacement after he was traded. But the Guardians got Michael Brantley. So they ended up with a positive on that trade, really, overall. I believe they plussed out at +3 on that with Brantley, even though Sabathia had a good career, made to the Hall of Fame as a Yankee, won a World Series. Obviously, Matt Laporta didn't work out. And there was also Rob Bryson that was not as good. All right, so let me know on that one. After that, we have Nightmare on Prospect Street. And that one is our old friend Yandy Diaz going to the Tampa Bay Rays for Jake Bowers. That was a net loss of about 4 wins above replacement. Not much more needs to be said there, but that is a nightmare, right? That is an awful one. Actually, I'm sorry. Number 6 is Yandy Diaz. I called that Frankenstein's Revenge. Nightmare on Prospect Street was actually Junior Caminero for Tobias Myers. And that one could be ranked higher, obviously. Let me know again in the comments. But that is a nightmare that the Guardians didn't get more or didn't keep Junior Caminero because he looks like a star. And obviously got nothing from Tobias Myers. But number 6 is Frankenstein's Revenge because Yandy Diaz looks like Frankenstein. He's huge. Number 5, we have the Abandoned Slugger. And the Abandoned Slugger at number 5 is Richie Sexson going to the Brewers. Now, Bob Wickman was pretty good. Did give the Guardians some value as a closer, but really was a net negative trade because Richie Sexson went on to have a really good career with power as an outfielder. Could have really used him. So that one's number 5. Number 4 is the Broken Arm. That, of course, is John Smiley. The Guardians traded away Danny Graves to the Reds, who went on to be one of the best closers in Reds history, is in their team Hall of Fame. John Smiley pitched a couple games with the Guardians, 6 starts, broke his humerus bone or fractured it in a bullpen, and that was the end of his career. I'm sure if that sound of the humerus snapping probably would have been a scary sound itself for Halloween. Number 3 for me is Death of the Dynasty. This is the Victor Martinez trade. This one hurt because that was after the CC Sabathia trade, and it was the same week as the Cliff Lee trade. Now, Justin Masterson was fine when he came back. Nick Hagedorn had some moments in that trade as well. There was another pitcher. I can't remember his name on the top of my head. I'm sure someone in the comments can say it. But Victor Martinez was still a year away from free agency. He didn't want to leave Cleveland. But that was the end of that mid-2000s roster, right? That was the end of that little era of baseball that was really fun. One of my favorites because I was in high school. Number 2, last hitter on the left. That would be Brian Giles. I think we all remember this trade, right? Brian Giles to the Pirates in exchange for Ricardo Rincon. He was terrible. And Brian Giles went on to be an all-star, one of the best hitters of that era in the outfield. The Guardians really, really could have used him. So that was a stinky one. But of course, we have to name the number 1 trade, the scariest trade in Guardians history, because it's named after a curse. The curse of Rocky Colavito. That's an obvious number 1, right? Harvey Keene was a great singles hitter. But Rocky Colavito was obviously one of the best and most popular franchise players in Cleveland history. Went on to have some great years with Detroit. Did come back eventually to Cleveland. Sadly, recently passed away, but one of the best outfielders in Cleveland baseball history, and just an awful, awful trade. There is no worse trade, I think, in the history of Cleveland baseball. Let me know what you think the worst trades are in Cleveland history, and go ahead and comment below your favorite scary movie you're going to be watching on Halloween. On Monday's show, I should say, when I come back with Jeff, maybe this will be Tuesday, we're going to talk about the Guardians' never-ending quest to solve center field and what's next for them in center field. We'll break down all the options, internal, external, and how they solve the never-ending graveyard that is center field for them. All right. Appreciate y'all making time for us today on Locked On Guardians. Hope you enjoyed the discussion. I know I enjoy all the support from you guys. In the meantime, download, rate, review, all that helps. And in the meantime, go Guardians, go. Have a safe and fun Halloween.